At the Naval Amphibious Base in Coronado, California, on a Thursday morning in March of 1979, the air came off the Pacific cold and flat. It carried salt and diesel, and the particular smell of wet concrete that never fully dries when it sits close enough to the ocean. 43 men stood in formation on the grinder, the wide asphalt training ground that separates the barracks from the water. Their uniforms were pressed. Their boots were clean. They had been told the morning would begin differently. A civilian had been invited to observe a hand-to-hand combat demonstration. That was the word used in the briefing. Observe. The men in formation had looked at one another in the way trained men look at one another when a word does not match the situation it is describing. The civilian arrived on foot, alone, carrying nothing. He wore dark trousers, a plain white shirt, and shoes that were not made for the surface he was walking on. He was 38 years old. He stood 5 feet 10 inches and weighed 174 pounds. He had a quiet face and unremarkable posture, and he moved without any of the deliberate economy that men in this profession spend years learning to perform. He looked, to every man watching, like someone who had taken a wrong turn on the way to somewhere else. His name had been written on the morning schedule in small letters between two larger administrative entries. Most of the men had not noticed it. One man had. Senior Chief Petty Officer Dale Carver was 31 years old, 6 feet 2 inches, and 226 pounds of functional unconditional strength. He had completed basic underwater demolition training in the top 4% of his class. He held a second-degree black belt in judo from an instructor who had trained in Kodokan, Tokyo, and a first-degree black belt in Shotokan karate, earned over 7 years of consistent competition. He had participated in hand-to-hand combat instruction for the United States Navy for 3 years and had not been defeated in a controlled engagement in 418 days. He had a record, and the record was real, and every man on that grinder knew it. When he saw the man in the white shirt cross the asphalt, he said something to the man beside him. The man beside him, a second-class petty officer named Brandt, who would later relay this to 3 separate people over the following decade, said that Carver's voice was not cruel. It was simply certain. The certainty of a man who has measured every room he has entered for the last several years and found nothing in it that gave him reason to doubt his own measurement. In the next 11 seconds, 43 trained men would witness something that none of them would be fully able to describe in the moment it was happening. They would only understand it afterward, in the slow assembly of memory that takes place when the mind is trying to make a record of something it did not expect to see. Nobody standing on that grinder had any idea that they were about to watch a lesson they would carry for the rest of their lives. If you have followed this channel for any length of time, you know that the stories that stay with you are never the ones where the outcome was obvious. Stay with this one until the end. The sentence spoken in that moment, 11 seconds after the challenge, would be repeated in training facilities across 3 branches of the armed services for the next 20 years. What was said, and by whom, and why it mattered, is the reason we are here today. The demonstration had been arranged through a connection that ran 3 levels deep. A retired Marine colonel who consulted for the Navy's Close Quarters Combat Program had trained briefly at the same Tang Soo Do school in Sherman Oaks where the man in the white shirt had first learned to fight. The colonel had made a phone call. A commander had agreed to something informal. The schedule entry was written in small letters. The man had arrived on foot. Before any of that context was available to the men on the grinder, however, Senior Chief Petty Officer Dale Carver had already formed a conclusion. He had formed it the way a man forms all conclusions that feel like knowledge rather than opinion, quickly, quietly, without examination. He believed the civilian in the white shirt was a product of Hollywood. He had seen the films. He had heard the name. He believed that the name, the films, and the actual content of the man's ability were 3 separate things that the entertainment industry had assembled into a single false object and placed in front of the American public as though it were real. He was not entirely wrong to be skeptical. Carver had seen instructors before. He had seen men arrive with credentials that did not survive contact. He had a framework for evaluating what a person could actually do, and that framework had served him well for 418 days. What the framework did not have room for was the possibility that a man could look like someone who had taken a wrong turn and still be the most technically complete martial artist currently standing on any surface in San Diego County. That is the specific gap between a framework that has worked and a framework that is complete. The morning proceeded with a brief introduction from the commander, a man named Ostrowski, who delivered his remarks in the flat transactional tone of someone fulfilling a requirement. He indicated that the visitor had a background in competitive martial arts and had been involved in the training of military and law enforcement personnel. He did not elaborate. He stepped back. The visitor thanked the man for their time in 4 words. Then he asked if anyone would like to work through some basic distancing principles with him on the mat. The mat was a section of wrestling surface that had been laid near the south end of the grinder. It was 12 feet by 12 feet. It had been there since early morning, anchored at the corners with rubber stops. 42 man said nothing. Dale Carver said something. He said it with his arms at his sides, and his voice at a volume that carried easily across the 40 feet of space between where he stood and where the visitor stood. He said that before anyone worked with a man, it was reasonable to know what the man had actually done, as opposed to what had been said about him in a room where people paid money to watch stories. He said the word fraud. He said it plainly, without flourish, without hostility of expression, the way a man states a category rather than makes an accusation. He was establishing a position. He did it in front of 42 witnesses and a commander and a man he had just publicly categorized. He then walked forward. He walked the 40 feet with the loose, unhurried movement of someone who has been comfortable crossing distances toward resistance for a long time. He stopped at the edge of the mat. He stood 7 feet from the visitor. The visitor had not moved. He had not changed his expression. He had not looked at the commander or at the 42 men behind Carver. He was looking at Carver with the attentiveness of a man reading a document he has seen several versions of before. Commander Ostrowski had his hands behind his back. He had not intervened. Second-class Petty Officer Brandt, standing 4 men to the left of where Carver had been standing, said later that in this moment he became aware of something he could not name in real time. He described it as the specific silence of a group of people waiting for a thing to happen that they are no longer certain they understand. The sound of the Pacific did not change. The traffic on Silver Strand Boulevard did not change. Everything else changed. 42 men and 1 commander were now very still. This is the part of the story that requires the same quality of attention that the 43 men on that grinder were about to give it. Because what happened in the next 11 seconds is not a simple account of one man hitting another. It is a demonstration of a principle that people spend entire careers trying to understand, and most of them never fully do. And before we get there, we need you to be subscribed to this channel, because next week we will be covering an event that makes this morning look like a preliminary exercise. Subscribe now, and leave a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from. We want to know. There is a concept in the study of close quarters confrontation that does not have a widely agreed upon name, but that every practitioner recognizes the moment someone with genuine understanding begins to explain it. It concerns distance. Not distance as a measurement, though measurement is part of it. Distance as a language. Distance as the primary communication that takes place between 2 people before any physical exchange occurs. A fight, properly understood, is not an event that begins when the first technique is thrown. It begins when 2 people enter a range from which exchange is possible, and it is decided, in most cases before anyone's hands move, by who is reading that range more completely. Dale Carver had spent 7 years learning to close distance. He was excellent at it. What he had not spent time learning was what the closing of distance looks like to a man who has spent the same 7 years studying every way it can go wrong. 7 feet. The visitor stood still. Senior Chief Petty Officer Dale Carver moved. Second 1. Carver's entry was a forward step with his right foot, a simultaneous rotation of the hips, and a committed right-hand lead aimed at the left side of the visitor's jaw. The entry was clean, the timing was sound, the technique was genuine. In 418 days of controlled engagement, it had been the opening that worked. The visitor was not where the technique arrived. This is not an evasion in the way most people picture evasion, a backward step, a flinch, a movement that creates space. What the visitor did was move laterally and slightly forward at the same moment, an adjustment of approximately 14 inches that placed him outside the line of the strike and inside Carver's effective range simultaneously. He did not lean, he did not hurry. He moved the way water moves around an object placed in it, without announcement, without resistance, as though the object's presence in the water simply changed the geometry of the path. Second 2. Carver's forward momentum had committed his weight. The visitor's left hand made contact with the inside of Carver's right forearm. Not a block, a redirect. The contact was brief and measured, the way a man moves a door that is already swinging rather than stopping it. Carver's strike continued past the space where the visitor's face had been and found nothing. His weight was forward, his balance was partially borrowed from a direction that no longer had anything in it. Second 3. Carver's training took over. He had been caught forward before. He knew the recovery. He began to plant the rear foot for a follow-through with his left hand. The visitor did not wait for the follow-through. The visitor's right hand had been at his side since the engagement began. It moved once, in a short arc, and made contact with a specific point approximately 2 inches below Carver's left collarbone. A point that anatomically corresponds to a cluster of nerve pathways that, when engaged with the correct angle and compression, deliver a message to the body that the body treats as both question and answer simultaneously. The message is, stop. Carver stopped. This is where the witness accounts become most important, because they are the accounts of men trained to observe. Men who spent their professional lives learning to record what they saw under pressure, and every one of those accounts contains a version of the same detail. Carver did not fall, he did not buckle, he did not make a sound. What he did was become still in a way that is different from the stillness of a man who has chosen to stop moving. His feet were still on the mat, his body was upright. His hands were at a position between raised and lowered, suspended in the exact posture of the follow-through he had begun and not completed. He was frozen in the architecture of a decision his body had not been allowed to finish. Second 4. Petty Officer Second Class Brandt had his hands flat at his sides and was not breathing. Second 5. The tournament director from the Naval Station's athletic program, a man named Gus Ferraro who held a black belt in both judo and wrestling, and who had seen more controlled engagements than almost anyone else on the base, had set down the clipboard he had been holding. He set it down on the concrete next to his right foot with the careful deliberateness of a man placing something fragile. He did not look at the clipboard after he set it down. He did not take his eyes off the mat. Second 6. Commander Ostrowski's hands had come from behind his back. He was not aware of this. Second 7. Carver's hands completed their return to his sides. He was fully present. He was standing without assistance. His face contained an expression that Brandt would describe 17 years later. At a dinner in Virginia Beach, as the face a man makes when he is asked a question he thought he already knew the answer to, and the answer turns out to be in a language he did not know existed. Second 8. The visitor stepped back 1 pace. He moved unhurried and quiet. He placed himself at 7 feet. The same distance where the engagement had begun. His hands were at his sides. His breathing was unchanged. His shirt had not moved. Second 9. The 42 men on the grinder had not moved as a group. They had moved individually, in small ways, a weight shift, a jaw that had separated slightly from its upper counterpart, a hand that had found the arm of the man standing next to it without any conscious decision being involved. These were not theatrical responses. These were the involuntary physical registrations of men whose training had given them the vocabulary to understand, in real time, the quality of what they had just observed. Second 10. Senior Chief Petty Officer Dale Carver looked at the man 7 feet in front of him. He looked for a long time. A long time, in this context, is approximately 2 seconds. He looked the way a man looks at a map after he has realized he has been reading it upside down, not with embarrassment, with a specific concentration of someone correcting a fundamental orientation. Second 11. Dale Carver said 3 words. He said them at a volume that only the man 7 feet in front of him could hear. The man 7 feet in front of him listened. He did not respond immediately. When he did respond, he responded with a single sentence that Carver would repeat, with precision, at every hand-to-hand combat instruction he conducted for the following 19 years, until he retired from the Navy in 1998. What those words were, we will come to in a moment. The visitor extended his right hand. This is the part of the story where the drama is usually expected to end, but it is also the part where the actual story begins, because what happens after the hand is extended, and what happens in the moment before it is accepted or refused, is where a person reveals more than they reveal in any physical engagement. The physical engagement shows you what a man can do. The moment afterward shows you who he is. Dale Carver looked at the extended hand. He looked at it for long enough that every man on the grinder who could see him was aware of the pause. Then he took it. He shook it once with the grip of a man who has decided something and is completing a transaction with himself as much as with the other party. The visitor held the grip for exactly the length it takes to communicate respect without performing it. Then he said 4 words, quietly, meant for Carver and no one else. He said them with the same unremarkable face he had carried across the 40 feet of asphalt 22 seconds earlier. He said them the way a man states a fact about the weather, without emphasis, without superiority, without any of the architecture of a lesson being delivered. The words were, "You read distance well." Dale Carver had called him a fraud in front of 43 people. The visitor had engaged him for 11 seconds. And the 4 words he chose to say in the privacy of a handshake were a compliment. Carver stood at a fork in the road. Every man who has been publicly wrong and privately corrected stands at this fork. One path is the path of the careful exit, the reframing, the qualification, the construction of a version of events in which the wrongness was not quite wrongness but was instead a reasonable position given incomplete information. Men take that path more often than they do not. It requires less. The other path requires a man to simply say what is true. Dale Carver turned and faced his unit. 42 men were looking at him. He said, in a voice that carried across the grinder without effort, that he had been incorrect. He did not add anything to this. He did not explain it. He did not soften the perimeter of it. He stated it as a fact, and then was quiet. The visitor picked up the jacket he had set across the folding chair near the corner of the mat when he arrived. He folded it once, the single clean fold of a man who is not performing the act but simply completing it, and set it over his left arm. He walked across the asphalt in the direction he had come from. 3 men near the edge of the formation watched him pass. One of them, a petty officer first class named Rutherford, reached out as the visitor passed and made brief contact with the visitor's right shoulder. Not a grip. A touch. The kind of contact that says, without words, that what just happened was real, and was witnessed and is now part of the record. The visitor did not stop walking. He did not look back. Gus Ferraro picked his clipboard up from the concrete. He stood holding it for a moment without writing anything on it. Then, he wrote 1 sentence. He has never said publicly what that sentence was, but in a conversation with a colleague in the fall of 1994, he described it as the most useful thing he had written in 7 years of keeping records in that facility. In the weeks after that Thursday morning, the story traveled in the way stories travel through communities of people who share a professional language. It traveled without a single written document being produced. It moved through conversations after training sessions, through phone calls between men at different installations, through the specific oral channel that connects practitioners who trust each other's accounts because they have trained beside each other long enough to understand what a reliable account sounds like. By the time the story reached Naval Station Norfolk, it had acquired 2 details that were not in the original. One of them was a specific technique name. attributed by the narrator of that version to a school that was geographically implausible given the visitor's confirmed timeline. One of them was a different number of seconds, 17 instead of 11. Gus Ferraro, who had been present, heard both versions and corrected neither. He said, when asked about this by Brandt years later at the Virginia Beach dinner, that the numbers did not matter. What mattered was the shape of the thing. The shape, he said, had not changed in any version he had heard. The shape was this: a man who was certain entered a space where another man was quiet, and the certain man learned something, and then had a choice about what to do with what he learned, and the choice he made was the more difficult one. That shape, Ferraro said, was the content of the story. Everything else was geography. Dale Carver finished his service to the United States Navy in September of 1998 after 21 years. His retirement ceremony was held at Coronado. In the program, under the section listing his contributions to naval training curriculum, there was a line about his development of a distancing principles module that had been incorporated into hand-to-hand combat instruction for 3 of the base's training programs between 1981 and 1997. The module had a name. The name came from the single sentence the visitor had said to him on the grinder. In front of 43 men, after 11 seconds on a 12 by 12 mat. Petty Officer 2nd Class Brandt, who had become a Master Chief by 1998, and who attended the retirement ceremony, read that line in the program and stood quietly with it for a moment. He thought about the morning in March of 1979. He thought about the man in the white shirt crossing the asphalt alone. He thought about what it means for a man to arrive somewhere with everything he is and none of what he wants you to see it as. He thought about the way the visitor had looked at Carver during that long moment in the handshake. Not with the face of a man who has won. With the face of a man who has been in that position before, on the other side of it. In some earlier chapter of a story that nobody in this account ever asked him about, there are men who move through the world announcing what they are. The announcement is the signal. What they are announcing is the distance between the announcement and the content. There are other men who do not announce anything. They simply occupy what they have built, quietly in plain clothes, on whatever surface they are asked to stand on. The content and the surface are the same object. There is no gap between them, because they never spent any effort managing the appearance of one that was separate from the reality of the other. The world is very good at noticing the men in the first category. It takes longer with the second. 43 men on a grinder in Coronado learned that in 11 seconds on a Thursday morning in March of 1979. Most of them carried it for the rest of their professional lives. One of them built a curriculum from it. One of them touched a shoulder on the way out. One of them set down a clipboard with the care of someone handling something that had just become unexpectedly valuable. The man in the white shirt drove back across the Silver Strand with the window down and the Pacific air coming in flat and cold. He did not record the morning in any document. He did not mention it in interviews. He did not claim it as part of any record. The record is the curriculum. The record is the shape of the story, unaltered across 20 years of oral transmission. The record is a line in a retirement ceremony program, attributed to a module built around a sentence 4 words long. The lesson does not belong to the man who demonstrated it. It belongs to the 42 men who watched without moving, and to the one man who stood at the fork and chose the harder direction. And to every person in every training room in the following 2 decades who learned something from a principle that originated on a 12 by 12 mat on a cold morning, when a man in street shoes crossed 40 feet of asphalt alone and needed nothing from thee.
Crossing except crossing itself. What you do with what you are is the only biography that matters. The one people talk about for 20 years is not the one you composed for them. It is the one they watched when you thought you were just walking across a parking lot.
Next week, we will be talking about the morning in 1983, when Chuck Norris walked into a film set in Burbank and found an argument in progress that was not his to involve himself in, and became involved in it anyway. And the reason that the director of that film has spoken about that morning in every major interview he has given since. That story involves a stunt coordinator, a decision made in 4 seconds, and a professional relationship that lasted 31 years from a single unrequested act. It is worth your time. We will see you there.